The crystalline halls of the galactic court buzzed with whispered gossip, but Cale Thorne had learned to tune out the political vultures long ago. As humanity's youngest ambassador to the Intersystem Council, he'd grown accustomed to being the subject of speculation. Today, however, the whispers carried a different edge, one of disbelief and barely concealed mockery. "He actually said yes," hissed Counselor Brex, his scaled features twisted in disgust. To her. Cale's jaw tightened as his gaze found Ashira across the vast chamber. She stood alone near the viewing panels, her pale purple skin almost luminescent against the star-filled void beyond. Her dark curls fell in gentle waves around her face, partially concealing the delicate features that marked her as Sarati, one of the galaxy's most feared and revered psychic races. Or rather, she should have been revered. Instead, she was an outcast. The gene-fractured one, another voice sneered. No psionic signature at all. Might as well be a common servant. Ashira's shoulders tensed slightly, and Cale knew she could hear every word. The Sarati might have cast her out for lacking their prized telepathic abilities, but her hearing was as sharp as any of her kind. He straightened his formal diplomatic robes and crossed the marble floor with measured steps. The conversations around him didn't cease, if anything, they grew louder, more pointed. Let them talk. He'd made his choice the moment Ashira had quietly, desperately, proposed their political marriage 3 days ago. "Ambassador Thorne," she said softly as he approached, her voice carrying that musical quality all Sarati possessed. "Perhaps we should reconsider. The damage to your reputation is my concern, not theirs." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. "Do you regret asking me?" Her large, dark eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw past the careful mask she wore. There was pain there, yes, but also something else, a strength that had survived exile and humiliation, a quiet dignity that no amount of social scorn could break. "No," she whispered. "I don't regret it." Behind them, the laughter of the court elite echoed through the chamber like the cawing of carrion birds. But Cale only smiled, extending his arm to his future wife. "Then let them laugh," he said. "They'll learn soon enough that I've never been one to follow the crowd." As they walked together toward the council chambers, neither noticed the way Ashira's reflection seemed to flicker in the polished floor, just for an instant, like something ancient stirring in the depths of still water. The private gardens of the diplomatic quarter offered sanctuary from the court's piercing stares. Cale found Ashira there most evenings, tending to the luminescent flowers that responded to her touch with gentle pulses of light. Tonight, she sat on the stone bench, her fingers trailing through the petals of a moonbell flower. "They bloom brighter for you," he observed, settling beside her. The space between them was small but charged with unspoken possibilities. "A minor sensitivity," she murmured, her voice carrying shame. "Not true psionics. My people call it a mockery of real power." Cale turned to face her fully, his hand covering hers. "Your people cast you out for not fitting their mold. That doesn't make you less than anyone else." Her breath caught at his touch. "Why me, Cale? You could have chosen anyone. A human bride, a Valerian princess, even a true-blooded Sarati. Why accept the proposal of a broken exile?" "Because," he said, lifting her chin gently, "I see you, Ashira. Not what you lack, but what you are." His thumb traced her cheek, and she leaned into his touch. "Intelligent, compassionate, stronger than you know." Their first kiss was tentative, soft as starlight. When they broke apart, her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I've never." She whispered. "Neither have I," he admitted. "Not like this." Their wedding was a small affair in the same garden, witnessed only by the diplomatic staff and a handful of friends who didn't care about galactic politics. Ashira wore a simple gown of flowing silver, her dark curls crowned with real moonbells. When Cale spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I choose you, Ashira of the Sarati, not for what others expect, but for who you are. My partner, my equal, my heart." Her vows were whispered but fierce. I choose you, Kale Thorn, who saw light where others saw only darkness. My protector, my beloved, my home. That night, in the privacy of their shared quarters, they came together with gentle passion. Her pale skin seemed to glow in the starlight streaming through the windows, and when she gasped his name, he felt like he was holding something precious and powerful beyond measure. I love you, she breathed against his neck, and he knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. The Nexus Peace Summit brought together representatives from 12 warring systems, their ships forming a glittering constellation around the neutral station. Kale stood at the observation deck, reviewing his notes for the day's negotiations, when Ashira joined him. The tension is suffocating, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. I can feel their hatred even without true telepathy. The Corvani and Zephyrian delegations have been at each other's throats for centuries, Kale agreed, pulling her close. But that's why we're here. To find peace. They stare at me, she whispered. Even here, far from the Serati homeworld, they know what I am. What I'm not. Kale's protective instincts flared. Just yesterday, he'd overheard Ambassador Vex making crude jokes about the human's defective pet. The memory still made his hands clench into fists. You're my wife, he said firmly. That's all that matters. In their quarters that night, they made love with desperate intensity, as if sensing the storm approaching. Ashira's skin seemed to shimmer in the darkness, and Kale traced patterns along her bare shoulder with reverent fingers. Promise me something, she said, her voice small in the darkness. Anything. If something happens to me, don't let them say I was weak. Don't let them reduce me to what I couldn't do. He pulled her closer, alarmed by the fear in her voice. Nothing will happen to you. I won't let it. But even as he spoke the words, he noticed the way the lights in their room flickered whenever her emotions spiked. The way small objects sometimes moved when she wasn't looking. The way her reflection in the mirror seemed to lag behind her movements, as if something vast and ancient was stirring just beneath the surface. The next morning brought disturbing news. Intelligence reports suggested extremist factions on both sides were planning to disrupt the summit. Security was doubled, but Kale felt a chill of premonition. Stay close to me today, he told Ashira as they prepared for the formal sessions. She nodded, but her dark eyes held a strange light, not fear, but something else. Something that made him think of deep oceans and sleeping giants. I will, she promised. But Kale, if something does happen, trust me. No matter what you see, trust me. The warning bells should have been deafening, but all he could focus on was the way her hand trembled as she reached for his. The main conference hall buzzed with diplomatic tension as the 12 system representatives took their seats. Kale sat at the human delegation table, Ashira beside him, her presence both comforting and somehow electric. The air itself seemed to hum with anticipation. The Corvani delegation will now present their territorial proposals, announced the summit moderator. That's when everything went wrong. The first explosion came from the ventilation system, a deafening roar that shook the reinforced walls. Emergency lights bathed the hall in crimson as armored figures rappelled from the ceiling, weapons blazing. Panic erupted as delegates dove for cover. Ashira! Kale shouted, reaching for her as a second blast rocked the station. She was already moving, her reflexes faster than any human's, pulling him behind an overturned table. Stay down, she commanded, her voice carrying an authority he'd never heard before. A masked assassin rounded their cover, weapon raised and aimed directly at Kale's head. Time seemed to slow. The assassin's finger tightened on the trigger. Kale saw his own death in that moment, quick, brutal, final. Then Ashira stood. The change was instantaneous and terrifying. Her pale purple skin began to glow with an inner light, her dark eyes blazing like twin stars. The air around her shimmered with barely contained power, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of ancient authority. Enough. The word hit the assassin like a physical blow, sending him flying backward into the wall. His weapon dissolved in his hands, the metal simply ceasing to exist. Around the hall, other attackers froze mid-motion, their bodies locked in place by an invisible force. The protective barriers around the diplomatic seats, military-grade energy shields designed to withstand plasma cannons, cracked like glass. The assassins' remaining weapons began to melt, their components breaking down at the molecular level. Ashira raised her hand, and the station's gravity shifted. The attackers rose into the air, helpless, their eyes wide with terror as they faced a power they couldn't comprehend. "You chose the wrong target," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "You threatened the wrong person." The floating assassins began to scream as their memories were rewritten, their violent intentions burned away by psychic fire. When she finally released them, they collapsed, conscious but broken, their minds cleansed of all aggression. The hall fell silent except for the hum of failing systems. Ashira turned to Kale, her eyes still blazing with power, her hands trembling with the effort of control. "You chose me when no one else would," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "Now they'll remember why they should have." The aftermath was a whirlwind of security debriefings and emergency sessions. Word of Ashira's power spread through the diplomatic corridors like wildfire, and suddenly the woman who had been dismissed as gene-fractured was the most feared individual in the galaxy. Kale found her in their quarters hours later, sitting on the edge of their bed, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. "The Serati High Council has requested an immediate audience," he said quietly, settling beside her. "They're calling you the Lost Bloodline. Apparently your abilities haven't been seen for over 1,000 years." She laughed bitterly. "Now they want me. Now that I'm useful. Hey." He cupped her face gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You were always useful. You were always enough. What happened today doesn't change who you are, it just revealed what was always there." Her composure cracked, and she leaned into him, her body shaking with released tension. "I was so scared, Kale. Not of them, but of what you'd think. Of what you'd see when you looked at me. You want to know what I see?" He tilted her chin up, his thumb brushing away her tears. "I see the woman who tends flowers that bloom brighter at her touch. Who speaks 5 languages fluently and reads ancient poetry for fun. Who chose to marry a stubborn human diplomat because she saw something in him worth saving. And now I see all of that, plus the most powerful woman in the galaxy who used that power to protect not just me, but everyone in that room." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I see my wife. The woman I love. Nothing else matters." They made love that night with a passion born of survival and deep, abiding love. Her skin glowed softly in the darkness, and when she gasped his name, he felt the echo of her power in the air around them, controlled now, gentle, warm. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "My brave, foolish, wonderful husband." "I love you too," he replied. "My powerful, beautiful, amazing wife." The next morning brought a parade of visitors, ambassadors who had sneered at their marriage now begging for audiences, military leaders offering protection, scientists requesting interviews. But Kale and Ashira faced them all together, his hand in hers, her power and his diplomacy forming a partnership that would reshape the galaxy. "They're afraid of us now," she observed as they watched the latest delegation leave. "Good," Kale said firmly. "Fear breeds respect. And respect leads to peace." She smiled, the expression transforming her face from beautiful to radiant. "Together? Always," he promised, and kissed her hand, proud, protective, and maybe just a little terrified of the incredible woman fate had brought into his life.